The views of this podcast are that of the participants alone and do not reflect the views of the Department of Defense. Welcome to the NAVCENT Chaplain Podcast, the place where we're empowering listeners to learn, lift, and lead as a servant in the context of the Middle East. And I'm your host, Mo Buford, and today's honored panelists are Commander Aaron Carlton, Commander Leroy Young, Lieutenant Commander Benjamin Box, Lieutenant Letitia Walker, Lieutenant Greg Lesher, and Sergeant Major Brown. Today, we'll have a conversation on the topic, understanding moral injury. So on behalf of the listeners, welcome to the show, gentlemen and lady. It's an honor and a joy that you are here. As the world watches the Afghan non-combatant operations unfold, we have witnessed the tragic loss of life, moments of inspiration, and an array of emotions. But without question, some invisible scars may surface, to include a term called moral injury. So to this end, I want to start with Commander Box. Sir, what is moral injury?
Yeah, thank you for the question, sir. Moral injury can be defined as combat trauma that wounds the soul. And it's caused by a service member in the combat arena either doing something or failing to do something or bearing witness to something or leadership betrayal that produces deep feelings of guilt and shame or deep disillusionment.
Nice. Chaplain Carlton, what would you add to that, if anything? When you hear the word moral injury, what comes to mind?
Yeah, just to add to what Chaplain Box put so well, I think of it affects the entire being of a person too. I mean, it'll show up in physical and emotional, stress and dysregulation, and so I mean, it's really affects the whole person.
Yeah, Chaplain Walker, welcome. What would you add to the conversation as we define moral injury? What are your thoughts? What would you add to that definition? What's a moral injury?
So I think in just reflecting on the past few days, this past week, there have been times sitting with the service members that as they reflected and they sat across from and our guests, I could see that they were struggling with trying to understand that internal turmoil and indirectly being drawn into the devastation and the tragedies that we've seen with these individuals living. So I think moral injury can also be something that is experienced indirectly and has a weight or burden on us as we move throughout life, sometimes unknowingly, and kind of catches up with us after we had a chance to reflect. Yeah. And so emotionally, mentally, and I've seen some even react physically to moral injury.
Thank you. Chaplain Lesher, what are your thoughts? What would you add, if anything, to this conversation with defining moral injury?
And the only thing that I would add is that that moral injury really cuts at the motivation, that a person have. It really undermines the why are we doing what we're doing, that it challenges a person's like integrity, it challenges their ability to be like authentically present to what's going on, because they're questioning all kinds of things, because again, whether that injury is coming from their leaders, but now they're questioning things on a whole other level instead of being able to just be present, as they might normally be questioning themselves. Of course, it depends on the situation and where that wound came from, but it's really just kind of ripping the heart out of somebody.
Wow, that's good. And you kind of opened the door to my second question. What are some examples and symptoms, of moral injury? Because if I'm I don't know, Petty Officer Buford, and I'm listening to this. How do I know? What are some symptoms? Chaplain Box, what do you think?
Yes, sir. In terms of causes, what can lead to it? Examples that come to my mind would things like bearing witness to raw human desperation. Very specifically, what I've been dealing with a little bit, if people are feeling betrayed by how we conducted the Afghanistan pullout, watching the Taliban take over, and they're saying, "Hey, my friend died in combat in Afghanistan, and what does this mean?" Now, those type of questions. On the side of something that they've done that produces guilt or shame, maybe that's either failing to step up in combat,
Wow.
or maybe they shot a vehicle that had passed the checkpoint. It turned out there was civilians in it. Things like that. Shooting a youth that has explosives.
Nice. Chaplain Carlton.
Yeah, on a less kinetic, combat-oriented scale, we see it over in this temporary safe haven. Sometimes sailors that are faced with there's a massive amount of human loss and human need staring them right in the face. And we had one sailor in particular that a pregnant woman came up and with her friend. They were in tears. They wanted some help and some assistance in a way that the sailor could not provide. And that impacted that particular sailor such that they came to the chaplain's office area and said, "I don't know what to tell these people. They're staring at me and they're crying and they're in tears. They want to do this thing that we're not allowed to do for them at this time."
Wow.
And they were asking, can you help them? And they asked with tears in their eyes if that was possible. And so everything inside of this person, the goodness, wanted to do something for people in need, but because of what the conditions and the policies that we have for force protection and for security, they weren't allowed to do that. And so it kind of it started to tear at them internally. And we were able to talk them through it and diffuse the situation. But that is just one small piece happening thousands and thousands of times.
That's good.
Throughout even this one particular area, just one temporary safe haven.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you, sir. Chaplain Walker, what do you think? What are some examples and symptoms of it?
Sir, if I think about some of the conversations when we're hot washing, or even as the in-processing team is actually entering in the information and data of the guests that are sitting before them, we have you can have as few as one person up to 32 family members, and they're having to try to capture ages, the demographics that you can just kind of look at. It's easy, but we've had some show up with just numbers written in Arabic on a paper, and they're trying to figure out their birth date and their birth years, and recognizing that these are decisions as they enter in names, birth dates, ages that will impact them for the rest of their lives as they're transitioning to their next destination or their new chapter, new final destination of their lives. And some have kind of wrestled with that because we recognize how important our birth certificates are and our ages, and how those are critical decision making for living on your own, for getting employment, just different things. Yeah. So they're wrestling with being in a situation where they're making a difference in someone's life, but they're also having to figure out ways to come up with answers to those without them having it. When we think about the females that are sitting at the table, we're trying to figure out their ages based on if they have children, if they can tell us the age of the children and back into that. Not everyone is coming with those definitive answers that we normally know. When were you born? And then trying to convert that from an Arabic calendar. Those are very different than how we process.
Wow, that's powerful. Chaplain Lesher.
I think that the place that I've seen moral injury the most is when somebody has recognized their own capacity for darkness, that they found that they have done something that they never thought that they would, whether that was just in their relationship, with someone that they love, or, again, something that they thought at work. And it's never easy to kind of stare at that darkness and to recognize that, like, no, yeah, like that, I could have made the same decision that somebody else has made, and maybe only small circumstances kept me from making it in the past, and now here I am, like, doing something I never thought that I would have. So, so while both it can be very damaging to have to stare into that darkness, it can also be incredibly healing, both and also in terms of healing, like the relationships that you can have with other people,
Right.
and just being able to forgive, because you have that compassion, because you recognize the capacity within yourself, and that it was just circumstances that maybe kept you from going there.
That's good. That's so good. So as everyone on this call and those who will be listening later, I think you would agree with the sentiments of John Maxwell when he said everything rises and falls on leadership. And if that's true, my question is, can a person be an effective leader with moral injury? Can a person be an effective leader with moral injury? Chaplain Box, what do you think?
I think it's possible to help people. I think if you're struggling with that yourself, it opens up some compassion, some insight, some understanding at the human level to connect with those that you're helping. I also would encourage those of us as leaders who have moral injury just to reach out for help. Sometimes those who excel at giving help struggle to receive help. And I believe that if we're going to care for others well, we need to be cared for well. And as chaplains, we can drop the ball there sometimes, thinking we're Superman or Superwoman. And, we just need to raise our hand and say, hey, I need some help, and lead by example there.
Let me push you with that, and I'll come to you, Chaplain Carlton. So I want you to talk to Chaplain Superstar, who's listening to this conversation right now, right? Talk to that Chaplain Superstar who walks on water, literally. And I want you also to talk to Patton's cousin, right? That phenomenal commanding officer who's destined to be Patton Part 2. They're listening to you right now. Give them some practical wisdom.
Yeah, humility helps, right? We're all mortal, and we all have limits. No matter, your limits may be a little different than somebody else's, but we still have them. We still reach them. We still exceed them, and we need to care for ourselves as human beings. We're all human, and that shows up. I read a book that talked about the theology of dust, and I liked it. Reminding us
the theology of dust. I'm sorry.
Dust.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yep. A theology of dust. We came from dust. We'll return to dust. God remembers that we are dust, and we're mortals, and we have limits. And I think that's a good reminder.
I love it. Chaplain Carlton, I see you. Talk to me, sir.
Yeah, I was actually in one of our living areas, and I was talking with some of the evacuees, and one of them was actually a very proud military leader from the Afghan National Army. Started off as an interpreter and then graduated into a leadership position eventually over time within his own military, and he was there at the fall of the airport, and even helped secure the airport prior to the Marines coming back in. And you could see it in his countenance and in his body language, the signs of moral injury, feeling as if he had let the organization, let the community, let his people down. But in him was also this very clear streak of great pride in his service, love for his fellow soldiers, and even in that group of people, his subordinates in this camp area, they deferred to him. They showed him love and respect right back, because they knew what he had put himself through and what he had done for their unit. And so he was still a leader and still there while he's processing his own, his own perceived limitations and perceived failings. And at the end of it, he said, I want to go back and I want to make my country better, is what he wanted. And so the beginning seeds of hope of maybe that he will process this, get through it, and it would be transformed into something that brings a new vision and a new passion for helping his people.
Wow. Chaplain Walker, what do you think?
Actually, sir, that's a great question. And I've seen that lived out in many ways. But I think if I were to answer your question initially, you asked, can a leader be effective with moral injury? And I think you can answer that three ways. Yes, they can be effective. They can be ineffective, and they could also be detrimental to an organization. But it takes to be, what I think we should focus on is what does it take to be effective? And that is, as Chaplain Box said, they can lead out of their empathy and through experience. But in order to do that, you have to understand your narrative and where you come from and be able to connect with that. Because when we don't understand that as leaders, we can run from that or avoid sometimes answering or addressing some of the most difficult situations because we've never dealt or dug deep and dealt with those issues ourselves. I was reflecting on one of the 06s, and he was just sharing with me when he was just first getting into the military and remembering some of the conversations that some of the senior leaders were having with him. You're going to be standing in this spot one day. It's important that you pick it up and you understand. And he said, and today I'm doing exactly what he projected in my life. He saw that in me. And he said, and I'm starting to go back and look at history. And he was remembering how they talked about the importance of triaging before they actually got off the plane. And he just started going back and pulling from the history and those experiences that he learned when he first came into the military 20, 30 years ago. And so being able to see that lived out and just even to hear him be able to reflect and see how that leader made a difference in his life. And I saw him paying that forward with those, the lieutenants, the IDCs, all the different service members that were out there, that he was as important. He felt as committed to pouring into their lives and their future as someone had done in his.
I love it. Chaplain Lesher, talk to us. Give us your priestly perspective on this.
Well, I definitely appreciate what Chaplain Walker, was saying, to just the elephant in the room that, can a leader be effective with moral injury? Yes. However, that leader could also do great harm. In Christian circles, we talk about, The Wounded Healer is a kind of famous book. And I've always had a love-hate relationship with that title because there's also that great possibility of being a wounded wounderer. And,
Wow.
So we have to be aware of that possibility. And yet at the same time, balancing that out with the fact that none of us are perfect, and so you can't wait to help others until like you're perfect. Like that, just, you never reach that place of perfection. And yet your ability to help others is in some way limited by the extent that you have been healed. So we're all works in progress, and we can all help and we can all be effective, but that leader has to recognize the extent of their injury and seek help. And only in doing that can they really be able to really fully give and heal others at the same time.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And that's a good segue to my next question to you guys. So what are the implications for command with moral injury or regarding moral injury? So once again, what are the implications for an organization or a command regarding moral injury? Talk to us, Chaplain Box.
Yes, sir. I believe that moral injury really is a threat to our fighting force and its effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And commands need to see it as such, that commanders need to get their head around moral injury and work to prevent it and mitigate it and understand it well. If you think about what makes a unit effective, if you have a bunch of Marines or a bunch of sailors that are walking around with moral injury, they're going to, they may be there, but are they really there? Are they 100% there? Are they 100% engaged? Are they as effective as they could be? And the answer is no. A fighting force that's sapped of its spirit is going to be less effective and easier to defeat and weaker overall. So commanders definitely should take moral injury seriously and lead from the front on this topic.
I love it. Chaplain Carlton, what do you think, sir?
Yeah, I love that phrase that Father Greg Lesher, Chaplain Lesher used, a wounded wounderer. And I think you should definitely coin that and trademark that. But yeah, absolutely right. In the words of Father Richard Rohr, pain that is not transformed is transferred. And so what we are on the inside eventually shapes the world that we create on the outside, the leadership and so it is, as Chaplain Box was saying, it is very detrimental because it can lead to all kinds of harm inside the unit and make it a place that is not a place of trust, of safety and team unity. So it does need to be dealt with and transformed for good.
Well said. Chaplain Walker, what are your thoughts?
Sir, I actually, as Chaplain Lesher was talking, immediately what came to my mind, tying to this question, was Henry Nouwen's book, Wounded Healer. And it speaks to this about those that desire to minister, that you must understand the humanity and the woundedness, how it can affect our impact your ministry. And so I think as you're asking this question about the effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. So what are the implications for a command regarding moral injury? Yes, ma'am.
The effectiveness or the implications for command. It's no different than how effective a team is physically. If they're not physically fit, they're not going to have an impact if they're fighting combat. No different than if they're not resting, then they're not going to be effective in making decisions and just even their time response. And so this is the same as if it affects our moral injury. It can have an impact on decision making, and even us being able to clearly make decisions or see the implications of decisions and the dangers of the future if we don't act soon enough. So that's what I would add to it, sir.
Well said. Well said. Come on, priest, take us home on this one.
What came to my mind was there's a really powerful scene in the movie We Were Soldiers, where their position is being overrun, and the guy on the radio, he makes a mistake, and many of their own people end up having a bomb dropped on them, and the colonel, Mel Gibson's character, he just kind of grabs him and he says, "Don't worry about that one. You're keeping us alive. Keep going." And so it's just like, so what is the implication to the command? It's the first response of the leader to the person with that injury is crucial. That, with the right response, you can prevent a moral injury perhaps from ever happening, or you could inflict one where there might not have been one, or you can certainly deepen, so the implication is just like understanding and appreciating the grave responsibility that you have to help your people in addressing these situations, that can inflict, that level of injury.
I love it. Well said. Well said. So I think the table has been set to answer, or to get at, if you would, the so what, right? In other words, here's the question: what are the best practices for treating moral injury? What are the best practices for treating moral injury? So our listeners, they are hearing, they're engaged, but okay, what's the so what? Chaplain Box, talk to us.
Yes, sir. I think there's three things chaplains can do, or caregivers can do. A lot of it just comes back to one-on-one counseling you can help somebody and in that privacy unpack these very personal things and walk through that toward the healing journey. Also, I think it can be very helpful for people to do that in a group setting, a safe, structured group, a small group where there's guided processing taking place and they're really connecting and resonating with others who are struggling with similar things that can be profound and healing for people. And then there's also an educational piece. An educational brief's not going to heal anyone's soul, but it can shine a light toward healing, and show them what the pathway could look like. So it's good to educate folks about moral injury as well. And then as far as actually applying, how do we get at it? I think it's a holistic answer. We want to approach it mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Sometimes cognitive reframing is really helpful. So if someone's saying, I should have done more, but you can question that or probe that a little bit sometimes and say, well, actually, no, you did all that you could have. Or they feel terrible about something like you did the best you could have in those circumstances, or you did the right thing. Sometimes it's worth to challenge that depending on the situation. Emotional processing is huge too. Just to talk about it is probably the simplest way to get it out and get it out there and to process it verbally. There's other ways with the arts or journaling as well to emotionally process. But spiritual treatment is huge here. This really is a wound of the soul. PTSD is an internal wound that's more physically based, fear-based thing. Moral injury is justice-based. It's guilt, it's shame, it's disillusionment at this moral and spiritual level. And spiritual therapy really does help here, just applying theology, applying the scriptures right at that point of need. For example, like the lament psalms can powerfully resonate with the healing balm to help them move forward.
That's excellent. Thank you, sir. Chaplain Carlton, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely, Chaplain Box. Yeah, that's so good. And just thinking about what we're doing here and our theme of what's your story, that somehow in the storytelling process we help in a meaningful way. We find the things that hurt. They find the things that wound. We also find the meaning sometimes. And this is why oral traditions, and why so many sacred texts are narrative and parable based, because stories pass down our meaning. And so helping people work through that in a setting that is safe and that they have connection, a real connection with other people, and that they can begin to tell their story and absolutely challenge the wrong directions, the wrong assumptions, and in a way that is loving and caring and good soul work. So, yeah.
Well said. Thank you, sir. Chaplain Walker, what are your thoughts?
Sir, so as I think about it, I think the best way to get at this is leaders need to set it as a part of the culture, like pre-socializing it and making them aware in advance. And because of the work that we do, it should be a part of just some of our everyday discussions. By doing that, we normalize it up front, so that way we hopefully prevent or mitigate and minimize the level of moral injury. And then creating a space. Everybody's voice is important. Everybody has a narrative, and allowing everyone to be able to share, whether that's in a group session, as Chaplain Box was saying, having a group safe talk discussion. And it has to be modeled by the leader, because if the leader doesn't model it, then no one ever will actually have the courage to do it. And I've seen leaders do it, because everyone's like, well, a leader is not supposed to show that level of weakness. That's not weakness, that's courage. And that's leading by example for those that they're leading. And then also beyond that, then connecting to the resources. So that way, if someone needs something beyond that, it's been socialized, it's been encouraged, and those service members can do additional counseling or additional speak with the chaplain, whatever that is needed. It's important to integrate it earlier on, set that pace, set that tone, and just make that as a part of the everyday culture.
Awesome. Thank you, ma'am. Chaplain Lesher.
Yeah, that was wonderful. You guys are making it hard to add something new. I think that the only thing that I would add is help. That it's important to help someone accept responsibility for the choices that they made. You know, and so maybe they did the best that they could, and there was really nothing more they could have done. Maybe they really messed up. Maybe they really did make a bad decision, and it's important that we help them to own the decisions that they made, even if that was a really bad decision. And because by helping them take responsibility for what happened, they can now take responsibility for doing better, or they can take responsibility for not being that person anymore, you know, to work on those steps of healing, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I would say in addition to that, to really confronting, you know, and of course doing that with great compassion and patience, but also trying to normalize, I think, the wound, in the sense that when you are responding to trauma and to some of these really heavy situations, you're supposed to be affected by that. That I, as a chaplain, would actually be a lot more worried if you had no reaction whatsoever and you just went on with your life.
That's right.
That would be really troubling to me to see that. So you're supposed to be bothered. This is heavy, you know, and it's good that they're recognizing that and confronting it.
So let me kind of, because you guys are just, this is so rich, and I appreciate your wisdom here. As you all were responding, this thought came to my mind. Does moral injury have an expiration date? In other words, let's say I received a moral injury, you know, let's say some 10 years ago, when I was in Afghanistan, right? In a different operation, and 10 years has subsided. What are your thoughts? Does moral injury have an expiration date? Over to you. Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Chapman Box. What do you think?
No, I don't think it does. If moral injury is not dealt with, I think it can just linger. It can fester. We can ignore it for a while, but it's gonna percolate back to the surface in some toxic ways. So that'd be my opinion. That'd be my take.
Okay, Chaplain Lesher, I see you.
Yeah, I would just add that certainly as a priest, someone who hears confessions, I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times I have heard somebody say, well, 20 years ago, I made this, you know, really bad decision, or sometimes it's even just something that happened to them, but it can be 20, 30, 40, 50 years that they have waited, and I'm the first one that they're finally talking to. That's so common. So I don't have a doubt in my mind that there's no expiration date on moral injuries.
So let me do a deviation. I'll come to Chaplain Carlton and Walker for this one. And you know, I deliberately don't want the priest to answer this question because I know he's gonna go with it. But my question is twofold. So let's say Petty Officer Buford, I'm not into that God stuff. I'm not into that. That's not my thing. Speak to me, Petty Officer Buford, who's carrying this moral injury for a while, right? And what is the role of, I guess we'll use the word in a theological setting, and we can reframe it some other way, of confession, right? And that's why I didn't want the priest to chime in on this one, but I want the two of you guys to kind of speak to it from a secular lens, if you would. What are your thoughts? Speak to Mo Buford, Petty Officer. I don't necessarily have a theological lens. I'm nursing this emotional injury. What are your thoughts? Let's go with you, Chapman Carlton. What are your thoughts?
Oh yeah, thanks. No, I kind of want to just dovetail a little bit off of Father Greg's, Chaplain Lesher's comments too. That it just brought to my mind a moment this week exactly that of someone that this current NEO operation kind of brought back some old decisions that they had made on the battlefield, and they were directly responsible for some serious actions. And so, but this moment has kind of brought that back out to the surface. And I think we as caregivers and as chaplains could be aware of not just the people that are directly involved in the actions here, but also of the people that that are indirectly watching this, and it has an opportunity for that moment of reflection where they're ready now to talk about their own history and their own moral injury. And this is an opportunity for them to get some measure of healing for that, and being there and being the right person at the right time to direct them to the resources that they need to hear a confession, to pass along the forgiveness and the blessing, to help them to reintegrate that part of themselves. So that was just my thoughts as
That's good.
Chaplain Lester was speaking.
Yeah, well said. Chaplain Walker, you want to close us out on that one?
Sir, thanks. It's a great question. I was actually reflecting on a couple of conversations I had this week with some senior enlisted leaders, and we were reflecting on the difference in the generations and how they care for the junior enlisted is different than it was done, back in the day, and how we have to now be able to drill down and understand that every service member is important. Everyone has a narrative. And if we don't understand that narrative to the point of even knowing why they came into the military to serve, if they find themselves in trouble, it could be a decision that was made that indirectly, maybe they did not know that was a bad decision. And through maturity and in learning and giving grace and mercy and creating a space for them to learn, and doing it in a way where you hold up accountability, but also you show them that there are other options and stick with them. I think that's how we work with those that may not have been in the military a long time, that may not have made a decision that was in combat, but maybe it was a decision that they made when they were younger. I know one of my enlisted sailors reached out to me, and he was like, "Chaps," he said, "something I did years ago has caught up with me." And some of the other individuals, I know one gentleman, he actually ended up doing time. The other one, they don't know. He said, "But I have worked so hard to turn my life around." And I said, if you hold on to your faith, and then continue to, and when I mean faith, not in a theological way, but hold on to the hope of that you have matured, you have made a difference, you're having an impact on the lives of the service members that are coming in under you, and continue to do the right thing, continue to be honest, address those questions, don't run from it, own it. And then know that you now have individuals like myself and others that can speak on your behalf, your reputation of who you have become. And I'm thankful to hear that young man, because of that, and because he didn't run from it and avoid it, he was able to be given grace and mercy because of everything that he's done over the last 2 to 3 years. Showed that he has grown and learned, and he is a different person. I think it just, again, goes back and starts with having them to understand that they need to own it, which others have said, but also remembering that it's important that they reach back and help someone else to help them learn from those mistakes or those moral injuries or those decisions, that their past doesn't define them unless they continue to repeat it. And my grandmother would always say, when you don't know better, you don't know, but when you know better, you have to do better. And that was just the topic of some of the senior enlisted leaders conversations that we were having just this week. So
I love it. I love it. So as we get ready to wrap this up, let's go around and, excuse me. There's an old song, Chaplain Carlton, if I can sing, I would sing it, but I'm not gonna sing because I can't sing. So I know my limitations. But the name of the song is "Where Do We Go From Here?" Where do we go from here? And so speak to the listeners. regarding moral injury. Rather it's an old moral injury, rather it's a fresh moral injury, or rather it's a moral injury I'm not even cognizant of right now. Where do we go from here? Chaplain Box, what do you think?
Sir, I think one analogy that can be helpful is just allowing ourselves to grieve, allowing ourselves to mourn, what we've experienced, the trauma that we've been through. To make the comparison to losing a loved one, we often talk about the 5 stages of grief. And if you're going to run that through with the moral injury framework, it's pretty similar. First is denial. Like, how can this be happening? For example, moving into anger and blaming, and that frustration manifesting itself, bargaining, if only this, if only that, well, maybe at least this, we're trying to hold on to something. And then finally, just coming to that place of sorrow, right? Of anguish of heart, anguish of soul, depression. It sinks in, and we have to mourn. We have to grieve. We can't just bottle it up. We can't ignore it. We got to get it out there. And as we do that, that's what leads toward that place of acceptance, where it's still terrible, but we're at least able to move forward, starting to feel more like ourselves, more integrated, more whole, and ready to do our part to continue making the world a better place.
That's powerful. Thank you, sir. Chaplain Carlton, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks. And that is super helpful, Chaplain Box, to think of it in those terms, because that's something that we're much more familiar with. And so that can help a lot of people feel a little bit more equipped to deal with moral injury. I think too, for us as chaplains, this is a special place because it is a soul. It is a matter of soul. It's a matter of spirit. And so for ourselves, just being self-aware, being aware of God's work and God's present in the moment. And this is one of my favorite scriptures. And I know my theological friends that taught me good hermeneutics would shudder at how I use it, but wherever 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, that he is right there with us. And so even in our conversations, recognizing that each moment of that is infused with divine presence, if we can really be there for our people and trust that we just need to, most of the time, just need to be there to help move them along in this process. And we don't have to solve it all in one shot, but this is a process and we get to be a part of it. And so it's a special place for us as chaplains and it's a holy place, a sacred space, and we get to point them in the right direction.
Awesome. Chaplain Walker.
Sir, if I was having that conversation with someone, I would just kind of lean in and say, shipmate, devil dog. It's important to understand that we are all human. We will make mistakes, and we have made mistakes. Some have caught up with us and some haven't. But where it starts with the head and the mind, and it starts with self, because we can only control ourselves. And it starts by working on forgiving and letting go, because if we don't, we'll continue to hold that on, and it'll be like having luggage on the back of backpacks and everything, and we'll go through life with this invisible luggage of regret, anger, resentment, whatever those feelings are, and we will destroy relationships unintentionally. But start with self and recognize that as we keep living, we're going to have some type of a disappointment. We're going to make some bad decisions, but that's where we grow and extend grace to self, but then also remember to extend that to others, because we got to, again, remember that no one's perfect. And the best way to move forward is working on forgiveness for self as well as others. Excellent. And to extend that to others.
Well said. Thank you, ma'am. Chaplain Lesher.
Kind of struggling to wrap my thoughts, for this one, but my mind kind of keeps circling back to don't be afraid. like, don't be afraid if those memories of the past are kind of bubbling up to the surface again. I mean, no one likes that. No one enjoys that experience. But I think that the fact that memory is sort of bubbling up, is a good sign. As others have said, that they're ready. They're ready for a deeper level of healing. They're ready to kind of go into that. And yes, I absolutely, I had no problem with the way you interpreted that verse, Chaplain Carlton. I think that, when we're talking, especially about our injuries, and I tell people, like, hey, we don't need to go back into our memories by ourselves. We go into that dark place, we invite God into that dark place. We have, whoever, our friend, we have a chaplain, we have our loved one, whoever that may be, who walks through that with us. We don't go into those places by ourselves. We don't need to, but also to have that confidence that true healing is possible, and that good really does come out of these wounds and these just terrible experiences in life, that when you come out on the other side of it, you have an ability to help others, for example, that you would never have had you not been wounded in the way that you were. That doesn't mean that you're going to look back and say, oh, I'm so grateful that this happened to me. But in a real sense, to look through that Christian lens, our very wounds can become resurrected, and life can shine out of even the deepest wounds that we have. So we don't need to be afraid.
With that, allow me to say, there's a passage as you guys was talking, and I see in my imagination, what I feel bubbling in my spirit is this sentiment, a divine exchange. And it's as if God is saying, if you give me those ashes, I'll give you something beautiful. If you give me that pain, I'll exchange it with some power. And so, panel, I want to say thank you for your insights, your wisdom, and the richness of this conversation. And so, on behalf of the listeners, thank you for your time, your insight, and just being who you are at such a time as this. Again, I am Mo Buford. Thank you for listening to the NABCENT podcast, the place where we're empowering listeners to learn, lift, and lead as a servant in the context of the Middle East.